Thank you for tutoring with Literacy Network. This training will talk about how to work with your intermediate learner. So you always want to start by planning for success. It's really important. Working with intermediate students is an interesting balance. So they're at a level where they can do more, but you still want to make sure that activities, lessons are focused enough so they're not feeling frustration and they're continuing to grow those continuing to reinforce the basic grammar concepts and grow more in grammar, increase their accuracy, basically. So planning for success, the first trick is to find out what your learners' goals are. So where do they speak English right now? What troubles do they have? When they go to the grocery store, can they ask for something, or is that difficult? Can they say everything they want to their child's teacher? Do they have the confidence? Do they have the language skills to communicate the way that they want to in the situations that they're already using English? You also want to ask them where they want to learn English. So an intermediate level student should be able to have this conversation with you. You may want to start by saying, where do you speak English now? And making a list of the places where they speak English now. Then asking, when do you feel good? And when do you feel nervous? So that you can find out what the student, when the student feels confident and when the student feels like they need some work. So for example, if they're talking with their child's teacher, they may say, well, I speak in English with my child's teacher. I feel comfortable calling my child in sick. I don't feel comfortable asking for my child's grades. So knowing those two pieces of information will help you, because you can always set the lesson up for success by reviewing what the student feels they already do well. So you always want to start with on a positive note so that your student feels encouraged. So you may start with a quick dialogue on calling your child in sick, because the student already feels fairly confident in that, and you're starting the lesson with success. Then you may move into asking the teacher more detailed questions. And then asking your student, where do you want to use English? And what do you want to be able to say? So maybe the student says, I want to speak English at work. Ask more questions. With who? With your supervisor, with your coworkers? Do you want to ask for the day off? Do you need to ask your supervisor questions? Do you want to just have small talk with your coworkers? Find out exactly what your student wants to know. Motivation is really key with the intermediate level student, because they know enough to get by, but it still can be frustrating, everything that they don't know. So you want to build confidence. This is a really key level in building confidence, and really targeting their specific goals. Controlling the scope of the lesson is important. Like I said, this is a difficult balance, because they know enough to get by, but it's an easy level to become frustrated at the things they don't know. So if the student says, I want to speak English at work, find out with whom, find out exactly what they want to be able to say. Perhaps they want to be able to ask for the day off. So you can start with that, with a very controlled lesson on requesting a day off. And then you may open it up a little bit by saying, well, what other requests do you make? Who else do you talk to? Do you request the landlord fix a problem in your apartment? Do you request a refund at the store? And that's a way that you can take the lesson, branch it out a little bit, because the intermediate level student should be able to do that. But you always want to start with a focused lesson. Again, the intermediate student can get by, but still lacks a lot of skills. So you're going to want to make sure that you're giving the student enough time to process what you're saying and to think of the appropriate response. That can be difficult, asking your student a question and then sitting quietly waiting for an answer. It's in our nature to want to help. We want to say, oh, the answer is this, or grab the pencil and fill in the answer for them. But it's really, really important that you step back and you give your student time. So if you ask a question, let them make sure your student knows that you expect that they will take time to process the information and think of the appropriate response. If you set that tone that you expect them to take time doing it, your student will feel more comfortable. And the more language skills they possess, the more they gain accuracy and fluency, the faster the answers will be. So you're really working on automaticity, but you do need to set the stage as a tutor in showing your student that they can take the time they need to respond. Remember that you are a safe person to speak English with. You are probably the safest person that they speak English with all week. So you really need to build that relationship of confidence and trust. With the intermediate level student, it can be very difficult to gauge understanding. So your student might understand part of what you say, but maybe not the whole, everything that you said, and that can be hard to determine. So one thing I would recommend is never to use the questions, do you understand, or does that make sense? Almost always students will respond in the affirmative, and it's not really giving you any information. What you want to do instead is give a task. So if you are working on the past tense, for example, ask your student to tell you or to write what they did at work yesterday. Show a picture of somebody at work and have the student describe the picture in the past tense. You want to gauge understanding through giving your student a task that they need to complete. Also, using open-ended questions is a great way to determine understanding. So if you read a story, maybe you read a story about taking medicine or a prescription label, asking your student, okay, well, if you have a cold, looking at this medicine label, how often will you take the medicine every day? How much will you take? When will you call the doctor? Then you're really knowing what the student understands with that medicine label and what they don't understand. One thing I like to do is use manipulative. So if you have a medicine label, for instance, like children's Tylenol, I bring in colored liquid and I bring in measuring tools, like the little syringe and the spoon that the liquid goes down in, and ask your student to read the medicine label and to measure the liquid. And you're really stepping back. You're not helping. You're really stepping back and you're letting the student perform the task. That's really the only way that you're going to see what exactly they understand. Speaking practice will comprise a large part of your lesson with your intermediate level student. Much of what you'll be working on with your student is building confidence, building fluency. So your student should already have an understanding of the basics of grammar, a lot of vocabulary already, but they really need practice using what they already know appropriately. So conversation is a great way to practice grammar and to improve fluency. Before you start the conversation with your student, though, you do want to ask yourself the question, is this grammar to build fluency, to get to know each other, or this conversation, or is this conversation really to enforce a grammar point? So let's say you are studying the past tense and you want to use conversation to enforce the past tense concept. You may start by asking your student, what did you do last weekend? Or what did your kids do last weekend? Now, if you know that the goal of the conversation is to reinforce the past tense, then you'll want to make sure that you're correcting the errors in the past tense. So if your student says, my child, he goed to the store, the error, even though there were two errors there, the error that you want to correct is the past tense. My child, he went to the store. So you really want to make sure that your error correction is focused on the grammar concept that you're hoping to reinforce through the conversation. And again, if you're wanting to do conversation to reinforce grammar, you'll need to make sure that the scope of the conversation is reined in a little bit, so that you're really making sure that the student is building confidence using the grammar that you want to reinforce. If you're wanting to use conversation to build fluency and to develop a relationship, which you should be doing every lesson, then your error correction is going to be different. You're really going to let the student speak. You're going to pretend that you're not in an English lesson, that you're just conversing. The only error that you want to correct is something that changes the meaning or makes what your students said incomprehensible. So even if they make, they will make mistakes with pronouns or verb forms, you are not going to correct most errors. And the reason is that your student has a basic understanding of basic grammar, of vocabulary that they use in their daily activities, but it's really the automaticity, the confidence that they may be lacking. As I said before, you are a safe person to speak English with. So if you let your student speak in a normal way, as if they were talking to somebody in the community, you are building confidence, you are building fluency, you are building automaticity with your student. So you're really just going to correct those errors that change meaning, or that make, if somebody in the community were talking to your student, they wouldn't know what your student was talking about. With intermediate level students, it should be a little bit easier to get your student talking depending on their personality. I still think talking about yourself is probably one of the easiest things for most students. So find out what your student is interested in, and realize that they may have different topics of interest than you do. So really try to focus your conversation on what your student encounters in their daily lives, or what your student is interested in. This may not be the time to detail your extravagant summer vacations, or a hobby, your horseback riding hobby, or something that really doesn't have much to do with the student's experiences. You want to focus the conversation on what your student experiences. So find out what your student likes. Do they like cooking? Do they like soccer? Are they really interested in learning about how to take better care of their family, how to make a budget? Find out what your student likes, and make sure that your conversations are revolving around that, because ultimately those are the conversations your student is going to be having out in the community, and we want to prepare our students to be successful in the conversations that they're having with other community members. I really like dialogues. I like dialogues because they model a specific situation within your daily interactions. So for example, if your student wants to learn how to tell their supervisor that they made a mistake at work, you may start by writing a dialogue, and you want the first dialogue to be pretty controlled, so short sentences, but you always want to bring in real, authentic language. So I don't hesitate to bring in slang, to use contractions, to bring in phrases that you may not teach in a grammar lesson. But you want to do that within the given context of the dialogue. And I like to have the student first listen to the dialogue. So I really like to do recorded dialogues, and first we just play the dialogue and we listen. After the dialogue plays, I ask the student, so who were the people talking? Where were they? What did they talk about? Find out what your student understood just orally. Next, I like to give the student the actual copy of the dialogue and play it again. You may play this dialogue 5 or 6 times. The key is that you are helping your student to understand parts of speech. So when you're learning a second language, it's easy to hear a string of language. And you really want to help your student understand the individual words, but more the individual phrases. Dialogues are great ways to do that. So you may play the dialogue a few times. Eventually you're going to have your student listening to the dialogue and following along. One thing that I really like to do to focus on listening comprehension is to have students listen to a dialogue and fill in missing blanks, and maybe missing words, missing phrases. They're really getting a lot of practice listening to the dialogue for specific information. Then to end the lesson, you will want to create a dialogue with your student. So maybe you give them a situation. So think of the last time that you made a mistake at work. Let's write a dialogue about that. You be the employee, I'll be the supervisor. Then you'll want to switch roles. Now I'm the employee and you're the supervisor, and I'll report an accident to you. This is nice because you're using the model of the dialogue you created and phrases that commonly go along within that situation, but you're really preparing the student for a situation that they face in their daily lives. So one thing that I really like to do also is in my class we record dialogues, and I've started recording them on my students' smartphones. One student told me that he actually, when making a clinic appointment, he listened to the recording on his smartphone before he called the clinic to make the appointment. So it's really a way that your student is getting more practice outside of class, and it's helping them achieve or perform concrete tasks in their daily lives. Pronunciation will comprise definitely an important part of your lessons with your intermediate student. When we're working with intermediate learners, one of the main goals of classes is to improve confidence. So your student has a lot of the basics that they need to converse in their daily lives or to get by at work, in the community. What they generally are lacking most is confidence, and pronunciation can build that confidence. The one thing that you want to be careful about, and I suggest talking with your student about this, is that pronunciation, the goal of pronunciation lessons isn't that your learner talks like you or speaks like a native English speaker. The goal is that your learner feels confident when they speak, and that people in the community, people who aren't ESL teachers or tutors, understand what they're saying. When adults learn pronunciation, they are retraining the muscles in their mouths. So it's not a quick 15-minute lesson and they've mastered that pronunciation lesson. It requires repetition. It's a lengthy process. So I always like to tell students that ahead of time that their pronunciation can improve, but it will require work within class and then work at home as well. So let's do an example. Maybe one of the most difficult sounds, or two of the most difficult sounds, are the Y and the J, especially for Spanish speakers. So I might begin the lesson by telling my student, we're going to study these two sounds. We're going to focus a lot on the way the muscles in your mouth and your tongue, because when you learn pronunciation, you're training the muscles in your mouth. So I may write yellow and jello on the board, and I'll look at yellow first, and I'll tell the student that I'm going to pretend that my hand is my tongue. So when we say yellow, the back of the tongue is going up towards the roof of the mouth. Yellow, yellow. And the bottom of the tongue, or the tip of the tongue, is actually laying on the bottom of your mouth, touching the front row of your teeth. Yellow, yellow, yellow. When you say the word jello, the tip of your tongue is going up. Jello, jello, and it's resting behind your top teeth. Jello, jello. The bottom, or the back of your tongue, is actually relaxed and down. I like to have students repeat a lot. Jello, jello, yellow, yellow. I also really like to give students a mirror so they can watch the way their mouths look as they're saying the words. For example, the B and the V, if your student looks at themselves in the mirror and they don't see their teeth as they say V, V, they're not saying it correctly. They're saying B. That's something that a student can look for and can correct. So I recommend that my students use a mirror for pronunciation lessons in class, and then go home and maybe 10-15 minutes every single night stand in front of the mirror and repeat the sounds over and over again. Remember, when you retrain the muscles of your body, it requires a lot of repetition. And you want to make sure that your student is looking at him or herself and knows what to look for as they're practicing, so they're retraining correctly. You also want to focus a lot with intermediate level students on intonation and cadence. So that can sometimes be even more important than correctly saying the letters or the individual words. For example, in English, questions always end on a higher note. So things like that you want to cover with your student so that they feel that their speech is more natural, even if it's not sounding like a native English speaker. Listening. Listening is a very key component with your intermediate level students. So oftentimes they know what they want to say, and maybe not perfectly, but they can say what they want to say. They can communicate the things that they want to communicate. Listening, however, is dependent on the person that you're speaking with, on the language that they're using. So with intermediate level students, I think listening should be a huge part of the lesson, especially because if you look at your student at work, for instance, if they can communicate fairly well, their supervisor or their coworkers are automatically assuming that they understand everything, even though that may not be the case. So we really want to boost the listening comprehension. I really like to focus on activities that allow students to hear phrases, to group what they hear. So again, I like to use dialogues, and I like to play a dialogue that I've pre-recorded ahead of time, so the student just practices listening to the dialogue without reading it. And they're focused, maybe I may say, listen for scheduling, or listen for an apology, or listen for the date and time of the appointment. So you're giving the student something specific to listen for. One of the biggest focuses that you'll want to work on with your student is that they will not understand everything. They will not understand everything the person at the bank says, or everything their child's teacher says, or everything their supervisor says. But if they become more confident in their listening comprehension skills, what they'll eventually be able to do is listen for the information that they need. They'll hear key phrases or key words that will help them get the information that they need, even though they don't understand every word. Dialogues are a great way to do that. So you may play the dialogue and ask for some specific questions. What time is the clinic appointment? What was the mistake that the employee made? Then you may play the dialogue again, and as I said earlier, give your student a written dialogue that's missing phrases. And your student is really looking for the information that's missing from the dialogue. When you take the phrases out, you're going to want to make sure that they're key phrases. So they're words that use phonics sounds that you've already studied. Or, for example, if you're talking about time, that you take out all of the phrases in the dialogue that relate to time. So you're really giving your student practice listening for one specific piece of information, one topic. A really great way to practice listening is to have a student listen to a voicemail or an outgoing message. So anytime you call a bank, a company, the clinic, you listen to the outgoing message first. You can have your student call up the Star Cinema or call up their bank and give them a task. So what number would you push if you have a question about a movie time? What question would you push if you have a question about the location of the theater? That's excellent practice. It's authentic because they're calling a real phone number, but they don't have to actually speak to anybody at the business unless you want to add that as part of the lesson. So the key would be for you to call the number first, would be for you to write a list of tasks that you want your student to perform, and then during the lesson, have your student call the number and answer the tasks that you've put forth. Again, like I said, I'd like to record the dialogues on students' smartphones so that they can listen to them later. I also want to focus, especially with your intermediate level student, that you should be bringing in colloquial language, varying speeds, and different speakers when you pre-record your dialogues that you use in class. You want to prepare your student to listen to different people within the community, not just you. So when I do dialogues for my classes, I ask friends, family, my coworkers to record the dialogue. It takes a few seconds, but it is so important for the students because they get example listening to different voices, different speeds, different accents. It's excellent practice. All right. Vocabulary. So your intermediate level student already has a basic foundation in the vocabulary that they use in their daily lives. One of the focuses that you should be putting when you work on vocabulary is using the words that your student already knows more automatically and more fluently, more comfortably. When you're studying new vocabulary, there are a couple things that you want to keep in mind for your intermediate level student. First of all, translation is not the best way to teach vocabulary. if you were to consider you want to learn German, and you were to look at a list of 15 words. On one side they're in English, on the other side they're in German. If you were to read that list a few times over, and then you turn the paper over, you probably won't remember many or any of the words. So translation doesn't work because it doesn't require that your mind create any pictures or any connections to past experience in understanding the new word. It's much better to make your learner work a little bit as they're learning new words. Research also shows that you've really got to limit the number. The 5 to 10 new words per lesson is really what adults can retain. So I would encourage you to find out where your student first is speaking English. So are they speaking at work? Do they work in a factory? What kind of factory do they work in? What do they do at work? And then choose 5 to 10 words that would pertain to that factory job if their goal is to speak more English at work. You want to introduce the words in a way that allows your learner to have a visual image of the new word. So maybe you will illustrate the word. Maybe you'll act it out. Maybe you'll actually bring in props that show what the new words are. This will allow your student to recall them much more easily and automatically. Then you want to offer authentic practice using the vocabulary. So, for example, does your learner need to learn the parts of a machine at work? You may want to practice giving very specific commands. So press the button. Press the button. Press the button. Flip the switch. Flip the switch. Flip the switch. Turn the light on. Turn the light off. So you're giving commands, simple commands, that require your student to use the vocabulary that they've just learned in a meaningful way, in a way that they would actually use it at work. With your intermediate level student, you want to multiply the effective vocabulary lessons by teaching prefixes and suffixes. This is a fantastic way to really to multiply your lessons. So maybe every class you're going to teach one prefix or one suffix, and offer some practice with the student. So say pre means before. What words do you know that start with the word pre? Where have you seen words that start with the word pre? Create a list of words together. Then bring your own list. Give your student another list of words, maybe of kind of difficult words that they may not have seen more commonly, and ask your student if they can define some of them. Your student will be surprised at the number of words that they can understand the gist of it simply by using the prefixes and the suffixes. And the intermediate level students really should be ready for this skill. It will help them a lot in communicating in their daily lives. Grammar. So your intermediate level student should have a basic understanding and comfort with grammar. What you really want to focus on is automaticity. Can your learner use the grammar they know comfortably and accurately? So first of all, we want to find out, where does your student speak? Where are they using the grammar? How are they using it? What task will my student achieve using this grammar? One thing I really, really want to enforce is it's very easy during a grammar lesson for the teacher or the tutor to do most of the talking. It becomes sort of a lecture on this is the past tense, da-da-da-da-da. Your student should be speaking more than you do during a grammar lesson. And the way that you can make sure that that's happening is you can introduce the grammar concept within a situation. So, for example, maybe your student's school was making polite requests. So instead of saying, I need to have Monday off, your student wants to be able to ask their supervisor more politely, can I please have Monday off? Can I request Monday off? So maybe that's what you want to focus a lesson on, is making polite requests. First of all, you listen to a dialogue where somebody makes a polite request. Maybe somebody makes an impolite request. You talk about the differences. Then you go through the dialogue, through the different parts, and you and your student write your own dialogue. So you're not really ever introducing the grammar concept as using the grammar terminology or describing the grammar rule. You're introducing the situation in which your student will use this grammar concept. I like to just give very basic charts, he, she, it, we, they, and the correct verb form, but very, very basic. So the student can use it as a guide, but really we focus a lot on hands-on practice. So if your student is doing most of the speaking, then you're really completing tasks using the grammar. So you've already introduced the grammar with a dialogue. Then you may show pictures. So maybe a supervisor and an employee with a calendar and a date is circled on the calendar. Or at the bank, a teller and a person who's needing to withdraw $20. So you're showing your student situations that really they'll encounter in their daily lives, and you and your student together are coming up with the grammar, the correct grammar for each of the situations. As you study more, your student should be doing more of the production, of the language production. So I think role playing is a fantastic way to do this. So maybe first you're the teller and your student, or you're the customer and your student is the teller. So your student is hearing the language that you use. Then you switch, and your student is the teller, or you are the teller, and your student is the customer at the bank. I spend a lot of time in role play because it's very important for the student. It's giving a situation that they really will use in their daily lives, and it's allowing them to practice the language that they use in a safe place. And that's something that your student can leave your lesson and go right to the bank and use the language that they just learned from you. So those are ways to improve accuracy with grammar. You can also definitely use some worksheets, but I'd recommend that you limit the number of worksheets that you use, because your student isn't going to leave class and fill out worksheets. They're going to leave class and they're going to speak to people in the community. So that's really what you want to focus on. Another component of studying of grammar per se is improving fluency. So we discussed improving accuracy, making sure that your learner is using the correct grammar, using the correct verb form, the correct pronoun in certain situations. But you also want to make sure that they are that they're able to use the grammar automatically. And so the best, one great way to do that is having conversation to improve fluency. So you may want to, if you're studying the past tense, like we talked about earlier, ask your student questions that are, what did you do last weekend? When you lived in your native country, where did you work? How did you take money out at the bank? Things like that. And you're really just having a conversation. And again, you're only correcting errors that change the meaning or that make what the learner said incomprehensible. Other than that, you're simply offering a safe place to practice emerging language skills. Now, when I say you only correct errors that change the meaning, that doesn't mean that you can't model correct language. So if, for example, if I'm having a conversation with my learner and I say, so when you lived in Mexico, when did you go to the bank? And if my learner said, when I lived in Mexico, I go to the bank every week. I would say, oh, so when you lived in Mexico, you went to the bank every week? Yes, I went to the bank every week. So modeling is a great way to, to show the learner that they made a mistake maybe and show them the correct way. But you're not stopping the conversation. You're still continuing the conversation. So that is improving confidence, fluency, and automaticity in using the grammar. Reading. Your intermediate level student is probably going to need to focus a lot on reading and writing. We find that a lot of students that we serve, if their oral skills are maybe they're more confident speaking and listening, or they have more practice with that, oftentimes we really need to work on the reading and writing. So maybe they're able to express themselves at work or express themselves within the community pretty proficiently, but they can't continue at a Madison College program. because of the reading and writing. So you may find out if that's where your student is, and that's going to be a key focus of lessons. So when deciding what to do for reading lessons, you'll want to find out what your student reads currently, what their goals are. So if their goals are Madison College, or their goals are to get an administrative job, something like that, you'll need to know that, because that will help you prepare reading lessons. If your student doesn't know what their goals are, they're happy where they are, they don't want to continue at Madison College for the time being anyway, they're happy in their position at work, find out what they read. Do they read stories to their children? Do they read instructions at work? Do they read letters from the teacher? Do they read bank account statements? Find out what they read and use those in lessons. When you study reading with your student, you want to always make sure that you're providing a task, so you're reading to do. So for example, if your student wants to be able to read instructions at work, ask your student for an example of the instructions they read. Can your student bring a sample from work? Okay? Or what job is your student performing at work? And you'll want to create instructions that are authentic, but easy enough for your student to follow, and you can make them more difficult as you go along. But what I would do is I would start by writing some instructions, and then providing the props that my student would need to follow those instructions. Another thing that I like to do is I've just drew a big map, and I have matchbox cars. So I like to give my students the map and the matchbox cars, and sometimes I provide written instructions, and sometimes I provide recorded oral instructions. But either way, it's a great way to have practice, reading something and performing a task. Again, with reading, maybe the most difficult part in working with your intermediate level student is they may get hung up on all of the words that they don't understand. Your student will not understand everything that they read, and it's your job to help them understand what they can do in those situations. So it's really important to teach skimming. How do you skim for the information that you need? So you first determine, what do I need to know from this? Is it an employee manual? Do I need to know the rules about vacation? Is it a field trip slip from my child's teacher? Do I need to know where they're going and what I need to do? So when you've got a piece of information, what do you need to learn? And then you can teach your student how to look for the words that help you give the information that teach you what you need to learn, even if you don't understand every word in the letter or every word in the manual. Again, prefixes and suffixes, root words, those are a great way to help with this. So you may not understand every long word, but students, if they understand prefixes, suffixes, root words, they may be able to understand enough to get the information that they need. So that's really where you're at right now with your intermediate level student, is how do you cope with understanding, being fairly proficient in the language, but not understanding everything, and still communicating well, getting the information that you need from written materials. Writing oftentimes proves to be the most difficult task for intermediate level students. What I like to do is I like to focus a lot on phonics. So I always start with the short vowels, the a, I, and I like to get a magnetic board and write all of the letters on little magnetic cards. And then I choose what sound will work on for the day. And I always start with the short A, the A sound, because it's the most common in the English language. So I put the A on the board, and I tell the students how they should say it. A, kind of like you're smiling. And then I may add a T, at. Then I'll add a C, cat. Then I will change the C, and I'll put a B. Bat. So what you're wanting to show students is that the short a sound is always a. It doesn't matter what the consonants are on either side. I like dictation a lot too for that. So after we study this after we study the sound of the short A and how it reacts with the different consonants, then I dictate some words or some sentences to students. I really like to have students dictate to me as well, because that's a good practice on pronunciation, but then they can also see the errors that they're making. So if they dictate to me, I write exactly what I hear, and students can see, oh, no, I didn't say that one, I said it with an A. Oh, how did you say it? Bet? Oh, that's B-E-T. No, bat, a. So they can see the errors they're making and see the corrections they're making. They can actually visualize that. So that's the way I like to focus on teaching the sounds and phonics, which I think is very, very important for intermediate level students as they learn to write more fluently. Spelling is very difficult in English. There are a lot of spelling rules, but there are a lot of ways to break those spelling rules. And so what I like to do with spelling is to see if I can fit it into what we've already studied. So the vocabulary we've studied or the grammar that we've studied. So for example, if we look at the past tense ED, that grammar concept really provides a lot of ways to work with it. So maybe I'll introduce regular past tense verbs add an ed at the end when you put them in the past tense, and we might work on a spelling lesson. So if the word ends with a y, a consonant and a y, like party, then the y turns to an I and you add ed. If your word has a short vowel and one consonant, like stop, then you double the consonant when you add ed. So that's a very a concrete spelling lesson that directly relates to the grammar that you've already introduced. Then you can turn that into a pronunciation class. So there are 3 different ways to pronounce past tense ed: t, d, and id. So if the root word ends with a voiceless sound, like stop, p, 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 it's voiceless. Your throat doesn't move. P, p, p. Then the past tense sounds like stopped, stopped. If the root word ends with a voiced sound, like stay, a, your throat vibrates, so it's voiced, stay. The past tense ed sounds like a d, stayed, stayed, stayed. If the root word ends with a t or a d, like bat, the past tense ed sounds like id, batted, batted. So that is a great way to combine grammar, pronunciation, and spelling into one very complete, very well-rounded lesson. Finally, as we've talked about a lot in this training already, what does your learner write? What do they need to write? Do they need to fill out an application for work, application for medical assistance? Do they need to write maintenance requests for their landlord? Do they need to correspond or to write letters or emails to their child's teacher? So find out what they need to write. Again, ask, where do you feel comfortable? Where do you feel like you need help? And focus on both of those, because the topics that your student feels confident on, that can just serve as more, as increasing confidence, increasing motivation if you start with that, and then you branch into the things that they feel that they need help with. So, for example, your student may say, I feel very comfortable reading memos or notes from my child's teacher, but I don't feel comfortable responding to them. So you may start the lesson with a letter from the teacher, maybe about a field trip, a permission slip. And you'll start with that because your student has already identified that that's a point of confidence. So you're starting the lesson off with success. Then you're working on what they don't feel as confident on, and that's the replying, writing back. So you're teaching your student to skim for the information that they need. You may have them highlight the information that's important to them, and then talking about how to respond to each of the important pieces of information in writing. I oftentimes will find out what students need to write at this moment, and then we write it in class and they can actually use it. So very often in my classes we talk about tenants' rights. A lot of people need to submit in writing a request for maintenance. So different students will write different maintenance requests in class, and many of my students have actually then submitted those maintenance requests to their landlord. So really finding out what your student needs to write at this moment and working on that in class. And this does a couple of different things. It keeps your student coming back to class because they're seeing the very concrete benefits of English lessons. They're taking things that they can really use immediately upon leaving the lesson. It also increases confidence. When students see that they are learning language that they can use every day, they start to notice that they are using more English every day, and they become more confident, which leads to increased fluency. Thank you very much for tutoring with us. I look forward to seeing you on the second day of training. If you have any questions regarding this training, please feel free to ask in day 2 of our training. Thank you very much.